On a Wednesday evening when Jason read, a cocky black belt with a smug grin stood tall in the center of the mat. His voice sliced through the air like a knife, sharp and mocking. "Hey, you with the mop." Jason called out, eyes locked on the janitor who was quietly wiping down the entrance floor. His hands paused on the mop handle, knuckles tightening for a brief second before releasing. He was dressed plainly, gray overalls, slightly damp from sweat and cleaning products. His shoes looked worn, his back slightly curved from years of manual labor. "Why don't you come over here and show us how to fight?" His grin widened as some students chuckled awkwardly, unsure if they should laugh or look away. "Come on, man. Let's have a little fun." "A quick sparring session," he said, gesturing towards the mat like a grand invitation. Marcus Hill, the janitor, slowly lifted his head. Jason took a dramatic step forward, adjusting his black belt so it gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Marcus gave a small smile, the type you'd give a child misbehaving at a dinner table, then went back to mopping. Jason wasn't used to being ignored, especially in his domain. The gym was his playground, and his arrogance had only grown since earning his black belt 6 months ago. He marched closer, voice louder, more aggressive. "Scared? Me, you've never even seen a real fight in your life," Jason taunted, throwing a few light punches in the air, making sure the onlookers noticed his flawless form. Marcus finally turned to face him fully, standing upright. His deep brown eyes remained calm, unreadable. "I don't want to disturb your class," he said, his voice level, polite, without an ounce of hostility. "Just here to finish my shift and go home." Jason's grin turned to a sneer. "Nah, you're not disturbing anyone. In fact, you'll be doing them a favor. A little live demonstration. Teach them why training matters. Right, guys?" He called out, spinning towards the group of young students sitting by the sidelines. Some students giggled nervously. Others looked uncomfortable. The head coach, Mr. Dalton, had left early that day. The assistant instructor, a young man named Brian, stood silently by the corner, unsure whether to intervene. Marcus's lips pressed into a thin line. His heartbeat, slow and steady, seemed to wake up something inside him, a muscle memory. A part of himself he thought had died years ago. Jason clapped his hands together dramatically, stepping even closer. "Come on, old man. I'll go easy. On you, 5 minutes, light sparring, just for laughs. Don't tell me you're going to back out like a coward." Marcus stared at the shiny black belt around Jason's waist, then at the young man's smug, condescending expression. He knew this. Type far too well, loud bark. Very little bite. The gym floor beneath his boots suddenly felt familiar, like home after a long absence. With a controlled breath, Marcus set his mop aside, slowly taking off his overalls jacket to reveal a plain black t-shirt underneath. His arms, though lean, rippled with a quiet strength that hadn't been seen in years. "If I step onto that mat," Marcus said quietly, his tone still soft but now carrying a weight no one could ignore, "you'll give me one promise." Jason scoffed. "Oh, you're going to start making conditions now?" Marcus nodded once. "When this is over, you'll apologize. Not to me, but to every person you've disrespected in here. And you'll do it loud enough for everyone to hear." The students leaned forward, the air thick with tension. Jason laughed, but there was the slightest crack in his confidence. "Sure, old man, you'll be apologizing to the floor." Marcus walked towards the mat, movements smooth and purposeful. Every step seemed to hush the room further, the once chatty students now frozen in curiosity. He slipped off his old, worn shoes. Stepping barefoot onto the mat that still held the sweat of 100 fighters, Jason bounced lightly on his toes. Throwing shadow punches, eager to put on a show, he wasn't worried in his eyes. This was nothing more than a fun little stunt to boost his ego. Brian, the assistant instructor, finally spoke up, voice shaky. Maybe we shouldn't relax, Brian," Jason cut him off sharply. "It's educational. Everyone gets to see why training matters." Marcus rolled his shoulders, loosened his neck, then took a stance that no rookie janitor should know, feet positioned perfectly. Hands raised calmly in front of his face, balance centered like a coiled spring ready to release. Jason didn't notice. His arrogance was too loud, drowning out Thigh in that moment. Marcus wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was a storm waiting to be unleashed. Jason didn't waste a second. The moment Marcus raised his hands, Jason charged forward with a flashy combination, a quick jab followed by a spinning back kick. Just like he'd practiced dozens of times, his goal wasn't just to win, it was to humiliate. But Marcus didn't. Flinched out with a slight tilt of his head, the punch missed by a breath. The spinning kick was even easier. Marcus stepped just half an inch back, letting Jason's leg cut through thin air before gently tapping the younger man on the shoulder with an open palm. Thump. Jason stumbled forward awkwardly, forced to turn around quickly to save face. The students sitting nearby went quiet, the playful atmosphere evaporating. This wasn't going to be the comedy act Jason had promised. Marcus stayed calm, feet planted like roots in the earth, arms fluid and relaxed. No bouncing, no exaggerated breathing, just stillness, like a mountain that didn't care about the wind. Jason's grin faltered for a split second, but pride shoved it back into place. Lucky dodge, he muttered, raising his fists higher. The second round of attacks came quicker, sharper, more aggressive. Jason's confidence had taken a small hit, and now he wanted to overwhelm Marcus with speed. Left jab, right cross. Low kick standard combinations drilled into every fighter's brain. Marcus, however, moved like water. His body swayed just enough to let each strike graze past him harmlessly. His feet slid across the mat effortlessly, as though guided by instinct more than thought. Then, as Jason overcommitted to a right hook, Marcus's hand darted out, grabbing Jason's wrist in midair. In a blink, Marcus shifted his weight, twisted his hips, and whoosh. Jason was airborne, crashing flat onto his back in the middle of the mat. The gym gasped. Brian's eyes widened. A couple of students' jaws dropped. That wasn't luck. That wasn't a fluke. That was skill real, terrifying, controlled skill. Marcus didn't follow up with a punch or a kick. He simply stepped back, waiting silently for Jason to stand. Jason scrambled to his feet, anger replacing whatever amusement had been there before. His ears burned, his cheeks flushed with humiliation. His pride refused to accept what his body was starting to understand, that Marcus wasn't some nobody who picked up a mop for a living. Come on, Jason barked, fists clenched tight again. Marcus nodded slightly, still relaxed, still breathing as if they were standing still. Jason charged again, this time feinting low, aiming high. He tried everything he had been taught: jabs, crosses, kicks, clinches. Marcus evaded, blocked, countered with ease. Whenever Jason's strike landed, it was blocked or softened. Whenever Marcus moved, it created an opening Jason couldn't stop. Twice more, Jason found himself sprawled on the mat, panting, furious. By now, the students were no longer watching for entertainment. They were watching in awe. Even Brian, the assistant instructor, stepped forward, whispering, Who is this guy?" Marcus stood patiently, waiting for Jason to rise after the third fall. His breathing was slow, his expression kind, almost like a teacher dealing with a misguided student. "Enough," Marcus said softly, but his voice carried weight. "I came here to clean floors, not bruise egos." Jason wiped the sweat off. His brow, teeth gritted, struggling to accept what was happening. Marcus took a slow step forward. "You asked me to spar because you thought my clothes defined my worth," he said, loud enough for every student to hear. "But you forgot something. True strength isn't loud. It respects, not humiliates." Silence filled the gym. Jason stood frozen, fists trembling, pride shattered. He wasn't facing a janitor. He was standing opposite someone who had walked these mats long before him. Someone who had mastered the art he barely understood. The gym remained quiet, the kind of hush that follows a powerful storm. Jason's chest heaved, sweat dripping from his temples. While Marcus remained still, the calmest man in the room, in the far corner, Brian leaned toward a couple of senior students. Who is he?" he whispered, trying to put the pieces together. No one had ever seen Marcus practice or spar before. All anyone knew was that he was hired by the gym 3 weeks ago to clean after closing hours. Marcus caught the hushed whispers, but didn't react. His posture was still steady, his expression unbothered, but his eyes carried something deeper. A quiet storm, a history he thought he'd buried forever. Jason wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his breathing slowing as frustration gave way to confusion. He'd been training for years. What just happened? Again? Jason huffed, but the sharpness in his tone was fading, replaced by hesitation. Marcus shook his head once. I think you've learned enough, but you haven't realized it yet. As Jason staggered to his corner, Marcus's gaze drifted to the black belts hanging on the wall symbols he once wore with pride. His chest tightened, memories flooding, back like waves breaking through a weak dam. Years ago, Marcus Hill wasn't known as a janitor. He was Marcus the Ghost Hill National Champion, undefeated for nearly a decade. His name echoed in arenas across the country, not gyms tucked away in quiet neighborhoods. He'd been faster, smarter, cleaner than most fighters in his generation, until one tragic evening. The night everything changed. He remembered the roar of the crowd, the flash of cameras, the electric tension in the air. And then one wrong move. An accident that took more than a victory. It took the life of his best friend, his closest training partner. Marcus had never entered a ring again after that. He had disappeared, walking away from fame, from the sport, from everything that reminded him of the accident. He chose a quieter life, till tonight. Back in the present, Marcus stood tall, shoulders square but relaxed. His voice softened as he addressed the room, especially the younger students who were wide-eyed, clinging onto every word. Strength isn't about showing off, Marcus said. It's about control. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Jason's breathing evened out, his glare softened, jaw unclenching. He glanced around, realizing the students weren't laughing at Marcus. They were watching him with admiration. Brian swallowed hard, recognizing bits and pieces of the technique Marcus used. It was old school, polished, like a master who had long walked these paths. Marcus continued, voice calm but firm. A true martial artist never raises his hand to belittle someone else. They raise it to defend, to protect, and sometimes to teach a lesson when words fail. Jason's fists fell to his sides, the fight draining out of him, replaced by something heavier shame. I didn't know, Jason muttered, almost too embarrassed to lift his eyes. Marcus finally stepped back from the mat, grabbing his old jacket, his hands steady, breathing even. You didn't need to know, Marcus replied. Titles, trophies. They don't matter on the street or in life. How you treat others, that's what counts. The gym remained silent. Only the sound of a distant punching bag swinging lazily in the corner. For the first time, Jason stood quietly, realizing he wasn't the strongest man in the room. Brian cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Hill. Have you trained professionally before? Marcus paused by the edge of the mat, then gave a soft smile. A lifetime ago, he answered simply. But sometimes. Life has a way of reminding you who you used to be. Jason's chest tightened. His pride had taken a blow, but something inside him still resisted total surrender. Maybe it was youth, maybe arrogance, but he stepped forward again. One more round, he said, though his voice had lost the sharp edge. Proper round, no more games. Marcus eyed him carefully, then looked around at the students watching silently. He could see some were impressed, but others. They were confused, unsure whether to cheer or stay quiet. Marcus's lips curled into a calm, almost fatherly smile. I'll agree. But under one condition. Jason frowned, again with conditions. Marcus nodded firmly. When this is over, you will apologize. Not because you lose, but because you tried to humiliate someone without knowing their story. Jason looked down, scuffing his foot against the mat, the fight draining from him. He wanted to say something cocky, but all that came out was a quiet, fine. Marcus rolled his neck slowly, stepping back into the circle, his body aligned perfectly, weight balanced. It was controlled. Let's go, he said simply. Jason launched himself forward again, but this time, he wasn't reckless. There was hesitation in his movements, his attacks more measured, more careful. Maybe it was instinct or fear, but the cockiness was gone, replaced by raw effort. Marcus moved like a river, flowing around every strike, deflecting every jab. When Jason tried to sweep Marcus's leg, Marcus shifted his weight effortlessly, stepping to the side and letting Jason fall forward. Another stumble, another round of shocked gasps. But Marcus didn't attack. He gave Jason the space to regain. Footing offered no cheap shots, no counters designed to humiliate. Brian, standing at the corner of the mat, whispered to himself, This is mastery. It wasn't just speed or strength. It was wisdom, patience, precision. It was the kind of skill born from years of discipline, from fights, not just won, but studied, respected, and lived through. Jason's breathing grew heavier, his punches slowed, and his frustration turned into something else. Respect. With every failed attempt, every missed strike, curtain was being pulled back. Jason wasn't sparring with a janitor. He was standing toe-to-toe with someone far beyond his understanding. And Marcus. Marcus wasn't there to humiliate. He was there to teach, with one swift but gentle movement. Marcus redirected Jason's lunge, caught his wrist, twisted just enough to send him back to the mat butt softly. Controlled, no injury, no pain, just a lesson delivered with precision. Jason lay there staring up at the ceiling, chest rising and falling, sweat soaking through his GI. He felt something he hadn't felt in years, humility. Marcus stepped back, offered his hand, and pulled Jason up. Now, Marcus said, voice calm but firm, your apology. Jason swallowed hard. His throat felt tight. He turned to the watching student skids, who looked up to him, who mimicked his moves, who copied his swagger. He exhaled. I apologize, Jason said, voice cracking but sincere, to all of you, for disrespecting someone without knowing their worth, and for forgetting what martial arts really teaches us. Marcus gave a slight, approving nod. The room stayed silent for a moment longer, until Brian began to clap, slow but steady. One by one, students joined in, not mocking Jason, but honoring Marcus. Marcus picked up his mop, slipping his jacket. Back on. Lesson's over, he said softly, and for the first time in years, Marcus Hill smiled. The next day, the Energy and Victory Martial Arts Gym was completely different. News had spread like wildfire. Students who had never stayed late suddenly arrived early. Parents who only came to pick up their kids stuck around, eager to peek inside the training hall. Even instructors who barely acknowledged the janitor now exchanged respectful nods when Marcus walked by with his mop bucket. Jason showed up too earlier than usual, the humbled look on his face. He approached Marcus before training started, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Sir, would you maybe just a couple of rounds after class? Jason asked quietly. No cameras, no crowd, just genuine learning. Marcus paused, studying him. After you finish your drills, see, he replied with a small grin. Jason smiled back. Fair enough. From mockery to humility. Transformation had begun. Later that evening, Coach Dalton returned to the gym. Tall, broad-shouldered, with decades of coaching experience behind him. He walked in carrying a gym bag, but noticed something strange. Students whispered in circles, excited and starry-eyed. Jason was working harder than usual, drills more precise, less attitude. Then his gaze landed on Marcus, wiping down the windows, his posture calm, unbothered by the attention. Brian. Coach Dalton barked, calling his assistant. Brian rushed over, nervous. Yes, Coach. What happened while I was gone? Dalton asked. Brows furrowed. Brian hesitated, then smiled sheepishly. Coach, you missed. It's the best sparring session this gym has ever seen. Dalton's eyes narrowed. Who? Brian pointed towards Marcus quietly. Him. Dalton approached Marcus later that night. You used to fight, didn't you? Dalton asked directly, no hesitation. Marcus looked at him quietly, eyes calm but alert. Lifetime ago, he answered simply. Dalton crossed his arms. Hide it? Marcus shrugged. Didn't come here to teach? Came here to heal. Dalton was quiet for a moment, processing. You know, we have some young blood who could use your kind of teaching. Boys like Jason who need a different kind of lesson than just punching bags. Marcus looked at the shiny mats, the punching bags, the pictures of champions on the walls. He had promised himself to stay away from this life. But life, it seemed, had other plans. I'll think about it, Marcus said softly. As class wrapped up, students lined up, bowed respectfully to their instructors, but this time, a few glanced towards Marcus with admiration instead of indifference. Jason walked past him, pausing just for a second. See you tomorrow, coach, he said awkwardly, then corrected himself. I mean, Marcus. Marcus chuckled. We'll start with footwork, he replied knowingly. Dalton watched from the doorway, arms folded across his chest. In every gym, champions come and go. Trophies gather dust, medals tarnish. But men like Marcus Hill, they build something far more important character, and that Victory Gym had been missing for far too long by the next week. Marcus wasn't just a janitor anymore. He didn't take any official title, didn't wear any coach's badge, but every evening after his shift, a small circle of students stayed. Behind, Jason was always first in line, gloves on, eyes focused. Marcus didn't make them spar, yet. He focused on the basics, the footwork, the rhythm of movement, the timing. It's not about how hard you hit, Marcus would say, moving lightly across the mat. It's about how well you move, how well you think. Jason's jabs became sharper, his stance stronger.
Ow.
Even the younger kids started improving faster. Coach Dalton noticed it every day, shaking his head in disbelief. All this from the man who quietly cleaned floors? One Friday evening after drills, Jason asked, "Why don't you teach full-time, sir?" Marcus tied the last mop string, leaning against it like an old friend. "'Cause teaching isn't about making students worship you," Marcus replied. "It's about helping them realize they don't need to worship anyone. Just respect the art in themselves." Jason nodded slowly, absorbing the words. He could feel the change within himself, to less ego, more control, more patience. He had come to the gym to be the strongest. Now, he wanted to be the best version of himself. Dalton decided to put the changes to the test, Jason Dalton announced during class. "We're signing you up for next month's local tournament. Time to see what you've learned." Jason's stomach twisted slightly. A few weeks ago, he would have felt cocky, excited to show off. But now it was different. Marcus patted Jason's shoulder. "You'll do fine," he said calmly. "Remember, it's not about proving anything to others. Just fight your fight." With Marcus's guidance, Jason felt ready not just physically, but mentally too. The old arrogance was gone. In its place stood quiet confidence. Within a few weeks, Victory Gym changed. The gossip turned to discipline. Laughter turned to admiration. The younger kids no longer mimicked Jason's old showboat tactics. They copied Marcus's balanced stance. Brian, once timid, grew more assertive under Marcus's quiet supervision. Even Dalton felt pride swelling inside him. This gym wasn't just producing fighters now. It was raising good people. And through it all, Marcus stayed the same polite, quiet, disciplined. But everyone knew the storm that had once retired was stirring again, not for trophies, but for something far more meaningful. Respect. The local martial arts tournament drew near, banners hanging across the gym's entrance. Students sharpened their techniques, energy levels ran high, and excitement buzzed through the air. Jason trained harder than ever, drilling the fundamentals Marcus emphasized perfecting. Angles, sharpening counters, and more importantly, mastering his emotions. Gone were the wild, flashy moves. Instead, Jason fought with precision, conserving energy, staying disciplined. Marcus stood quietly in the background, always observing, always correcting with a calm voice. "You don't have to be loud to make a statement," Marcus reminded him after every session. Jason understood now power wasn't in the shout. It was in the silence between strikes. The tournament day arrived. Jason walked into the community sports center, gloves slung over his shoulders, head lowered and quiet. Focus. His name was announced alongside his opponent. A well-known local prospect. Spectators whispered, betting on the prospect, dismissing Jason, but Marcus remained unshaken. Sitting in the coach's corner, though he wore no badge or title, the bell rang. Jason didn't rush in like before. He circled his opponent, measured his timing, absorbed the pressure. His counters were clean, his footwork disciplined. Every time the opponent charged in, Jason stepped aside with Marcus's signature calmness, punishing mistakes with precision in. The second round, Jason landed a clean body shot, followed by a quick trip, sending his opponent to the mat. The room went silent, and then erupted in applause. Between matches, Dalton leaned over to Marcus. "You sure you want to stay behind the mop hill?" Marcus smiled quietly. "My place isn't in the spotlight anymore, but my knowledge can still walk into that ring." Dalton chuckled. He could have gone national back in the day. Smile faded slightly. His past remained a wound, stitched but never forgotten. "I went national. I went beyond. I lost more than titles," Marcus said softly. "Now, I just want to build better fighters, better men." Dalton understood. He placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "It's exactly what you're doing." Jason advanced through the brackets, surprising everyone. In the final match, he stood against a reigning champion, taller, more experienced. The crowd leaned towards the champion, but Marcus's calm voice guided Jason through every round. "Don't fight the opponent. Fight the fight," Marcus whispered before the final bell. Jason held his ground, absorbing pressure, countering smartly. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. His movements echoed Marcus's style, fluid, patient, explosive only when necessary. In the last round, with perfect timing, Jason landed a spinning hook kick that sent his opponent stumbling back. The crowd erupted. When the referee raised Jason's hand, the cheers weren't just for victory, they were for transformation. Jason glanced at Marcus, raising his hand in silent respect, and for the first time in years, Marcus allowed himself to feel proud again. The medal felt cold in Jason's hands as he stepped down from the podium. He wasn't grinning like others who won that day. Instead, his expression held quiet pride and humility. "Thank you," he said softly, handing the medal to Marcus. Marcus raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised. "Why me?" Jason shrugged. "Because this wasn't just me. It was your teachings." Marcus didn't accept it. "No," he said firmly. "Keep it. You earned it, not through brute strength, but through discipline and respect." Jason clutched the medal tighter, realizing this win wasn't about Famit, was about becoming someone better. Later that night, Marcus sat alone in the empty gym, lights dimmed, the distant sound of the wind against the windows. His fingers traced the outlines of dusty old photos on the wall. Champions of the past. A younger version of himself smiled from a newspaper clipping. Marcus Hill, national champion, unbeaten 28-0 record. His throat tightened. His mind drifted back to the day it all changed, the brutal fight. The tragic accident that claimed his training partner's life. It wasn't just the loss of a friend. It was the loss of his soul inside the ring. That night, he had walked away, vowing to never return, vowing to live a quiet, unseen life. But something had shifted these past weeks. The cocky Jason had transformed into a disciplined fighter. The rowdy kids in the gym started training with sincerity. The culture of disrespect was being replaced. With humility in Marcus felt purpose again, not in competition, but in mentorship. The wounds of the past still ached, but they didn't control him anymore. He realized he hadn't returned to fighting. He had returned to teaching, guiding, healing. The next morning, Coach Dalton approached Marcus with a determined look. "You've done more in a month than I could have done in a year," he said bluntly. "It's time you stop cleaning floors and start teaching officially." Fuck. Marcus sighed, hesitant. "Dalton." Dalton held up a hand. "What?" "Not for glory, not for money. For the kids. For the future." Marcus stood silently, heart conflicted. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to step back on the mat, not as a champion chasing trophies, but as a teacher, building champions. The next week, Coach Dalton made it official. At the Monday class, students gathered around the mat as Dalton stood in front of them. "Everyone," he announced, "we have a new instructor joining us. Someone many of you already know. Marcus Hill." Gasps filled the room. Jason smiled proudly while Brian and others clapped. Marcus stepped forward, head high, shoulders squared, dressed not in janitor clothes, but in a clean GI with a black belt tied firmly around his waist. Marcus's expression was humble, but his presence commanded silence. "No more hiding," Dalton whispered beside him. "You've earned this." That evening, a surprise visitor walked in. Dean Wilcox, former regional champion who had trained at Victory Gym years ago. Dean, smug as ever, glanced at Marcus, a janitor turned instructor. "What a joke," he scoffed loud enough for everyone to hear. Dalton stepped forward, but Marcus calmly raised his hand. "Let him talk," Marcus said. His voice was soft but steady. Dean walked onto the mat, arrogance in every step. "Let's see what the janitor coach has. You up for a little fun, Marcus?" Marcus didn't flinch. "I don't spar for fun," he replied, "but I will spar for lessons." Students quickly formed a circle, whispering. Jason's fists clenched. He knew what Dean was trying to do: humiliate Marcus in front of everyone. The two stood across from each other. Dean launched aggressively, expecting to overpower quickly. But Marcus wasn't the man to be rushed. With minimal movement, he dodged every strike, countering with effortless sweeps and smooth takedowns. Dean grunted, frustration turning into rage. He charged blindly, only for Marcus to slip behind him and hook his legs in a textbook takedown, pressing Dean's back to the mat in seconds. Gasps echoed, jaws dropped. Marcus stood over Dean but didn't gloat. He extended his hand, helping the embarrassed fighter up. "Arrogance is a heavy burden," Marcus said softly, "but you can choose to drop it." Dean, red-faced, stood in the center of the room. He didn't say much, just gave a curt nod and quietly left the gym. Dalton smiled proudly. Jason's eyes beamed with admiration. Marcus turned to the students. "This," he said, pointing to the mats, "is a place of learning, not of mocking. Respect everyone, no matter their belt, no matter their shoes, no matter their job." The students nodded in silence, understanding sinking deeper than ever before. From that moment on, Marcus was no longer just a janitor. He was the heart of Victory Gym. Later that week, Coach Dalton gathered everyone before training began. The mats were spotless, sunlight streaming through the tall gym windows. But the atmosphere was serious. Jason stepped forward voluntarily. No one had to nudge him. With a respectful bow to the students and instructors, Jason cleared his throat, his voice steady. "I have something to say. Not because anyone forced me, but because it's the right thing to do." Marcus stood silently nearby, arms crossed, observing the transformation of the once arrogant black belt. Jason continued, "I judged someone without knowing them. I let my belt fool me into thinking I was better when I had barely begun to understand what true martial arts meant." A few younger students nodded, hanging on to every word. Jason finished, "From this day on, I'll respect every person who walks into this gym. I'll train harder, but with humility." Then he bowed deeply toward Marcus. "Thank you, Coach Marcus, for waking me up." Marcus stepped forward, placing a hand on Jason's shoulder. "An apology backed by change is what makes a person stronger," he said softly. Coach Dalton beamed with pride, while Brian clapped along with the other students. Marcus looked around the gym, taking a slow breath. This place is more than mats and belts. It's where you shape your character. Outside these walls, your punches won't always protect you, but your respect will. The room felt different. No ego, no rivalry, just respect. Raw, honest, and real. In the weeks that followed, Victory Gym's culture shifted. The younger students looked up to Jason, not as a cocky senior, but as an example of redemption. Newcomers were welcomed with encouragement, not mockery. Marcus trained alongside everyone, not as a celebrity or a forgotten champion, but as a patient guide. Even the shyest kids stayed longer after class, eager to learn. Brian became more confident under Marcus's guidance, helping kids with drills and footwork. Victory Gym was no longer just about trophies. It became about respect, discipline, and personal growth. One afternoon, Marcus was approached by a small group of parents. "Coach Marcus, would you consider opening beginner classes for kids?" the mother asked hopefully. Marcus smiled softly. "Of course. Every child deserves to learn confidence and respect." Coach Dalton placed an arm around Marcus's shoulder. "Owed you?" "Hill, this gym needed you." Marcus chuckled. "Maybe I needed it too." The doors of Victory Gym stayed open longer every day now, not just to fighters, but to every person ready to learn, to grow, and to respect others, regardless of their past. And Marcus was finally at peace. Months passed, and Victory Gym transformed from a typical martial arts center into a true community hub. Parents stayed longer to watch their kids train. Students volunteered to help clean after class, and older fighters mentored younger ones without being asked. At the center of it all was Marcus Hill, no longer just the janitor, but the quiet force who reminded everyone what true strength meant. Jason trained every evening. He's becoming more balanced, not just in his movements, but in his attitude. His once cocky grin was replaced by a humble, calm focus. Dalton smiled more these days. "This is how it was always supposed to be," he told Marcus one evening as they locked up the gym. Marcus nodded quietly, satisfied. One afternoon, an old photographer arrived at the gym carrying a worn-out sports magazine. "Marcus Hill." "Silent Storm," the photographer said, placing the magazine on the front desk. The headline visible: "Unstoppable Fighter Vanishes After Tragedy." Marcus's expression stayed calm. That chapter closed a long time ago. But the photographer smiled. "Maybe it did. But your story didn't end. It changed course." Dalton walked over and grinned. "You didn't disappear, Hill. You just started fighting a different battle, helping kids, changing lives." Marcus looked at the students drilling in the background. Jason helping a young boy fix his stance, and nodded. "Now that's the only title I want now, teacher." Dalton and Marcus organized the gym's first ever Respect and Discipline Community Day. Families, children, and even seniors gathered in the gym. Instead of just sparring demonstrations, the day included speeches about character, workshops on patience, and stories from fighters who had learned from their mistakes. Jason took the stage and spoke from the heart about his transformation, admitting his past arrogance and thanking Marcus for showing him the way. Marcus spoke briefly too. Martial arts is about lifting people up, not putting them down. The applause was loud, not for titles, but for values. As the sun set on Community Day, Dalton stood beside Marcus, both watching the kids laughing and practicing together. "On the mats, you sure you don't want to compete again?" Dalton teased. Marcus chuckled, eyes soft. "I'm already winning in a different way." Dalton nodded. "Maybe it's time to change that old photo on the wall."
Us.
Marcus smiled. "Maybe, but don't call me Silent Storm anymore. Call me Coach Hill." And from that day on, Victory Gym wasn't just a place for fights. It was where futures were built, where egos were humbled, and where respect ruled the mats. Months rolled into a full year, and Victory Gym thrived like never before. The once toxic, ego-driven environment was replaced by a culture of encouragement, mentorship, and honest hard work. Jason had become a respected figure in the gym, now teaching the beginners class on weekends. He no longer fought for praise, but to inspire others to rise above their own limits. Every time he spoke, his words echoed what Marcus had taught him: control, respect, and dignity above brute force. Marcus walked through the gym one afternoon, mopping the edges like old times, smiling to himself. He wasn't ashamed of the mop anymore. It reminded him of his journey from brokenness back to purpose. One chilly evening, an elderly man entered the gym, walking slowly with a cane. His eyes held warmth and wisdom. Dalton greeted him with surprise. "Coach Grayson." "Been years." Grayson's eyes landed on Marcus. "So, you've returned, Silent Storm?" Marcus smiled humbly. "Not to compete, Coach, just to teach." Grayson watched the kids practicing, the instructors guiding with patience. This is the greatest comeback of all, Marcus. You didn't just come back to the sport, you came back to life." Marcus nodded, realizing in that moment that the respect he now held was more meaningful than any belt or trophy. Dalton made one last change in the gym. The faded poster of Marcus's championship days was replaced with a new frame.
Oh.
It read, "Coach Marcus Hill, the teacher who taught us respect." Underneath, a simple quote from Marcus himself: "True fighters don't chase glory, they build character." The younger kids read it every day before stepping onto the mat. Even parents smiled, knowing their children were learning more than just punches. They were learning life lessons. Marcus never asked for recognition, but he finally received something better than fame: gratitude. On the gym's anniversary, Marcus stood before the full class. "People will judge you by your clothes, your job, your background," he said. "Some will challenge you to make fun of you, others to test you." He glanced toward Jason, then at the younger kids. "But your response, your character, will silence them." The students stood taller. Marcus ended with a soft smile. "Never fight to humiliate. Fight to inspire. Fight to protect. And when you have nothing left to prove, fight to teach." As the students bowed in unison, Marcus Hill realized this was his greatest victory yet, not in rings or arenas, but in hearts. End of story.